Welcome back to Road Gang Radio. Join Jimmy Mack and Lindsay Lawler's Gang of the Airwaves by subscribing to Radio Nemo on YouTube.
We celebrate all kinds.
Make it official. After all, if you're listening, you're already in the gang. The Road Gang.
Man, that was by the skin of our teeth. And you wouldn't even known it was by the skin of our teeth if I hadn't told you it was by the skin of our teeth. Man, it smells like fall in here, dude.
Yeah.
It is like outstanding. I got a coffee brewing in the other room. Dre has given us a little heat, not enough to be like, dude, it's stuffy in here. Get over yourself. It's not that cold. Just enough heat to make it feel warm and inviting. We had the fall music playing. We had the energy this morning. Dre took a brisk walk to get his morning constitution going. It's 11:11, which means it's Veterans Day here at Road Gang Radio. We've got a veteran with us right now, by the way, a guy who is humble and modest, did his bit, has done his bit all across the transportation industry as well, and has made his way to us.
Yep.
As he does every Tuesday, or as the good pastor would say, Tuesday. Of course, it is Maintenance Matters with Kevin Lindsey, the manager of technical service for TravelCenters of America. So thrilled to have him, guys. Go to ta-petro.com and find out what those folks can do for you. Hey, Kevin, how you doing, man?
Hello.
I'm good. How are you guys?
We don't have any complaints of it. When I tell you by the skin of my teeth, Dre played, he skipped a commercial. And so I'm literally sitting down and I realize we're going back on. And I'm like, what is going on here, man?
Because anytime I put my spots in, I don't put in the opener until like later, and I jumped the gun. So yeah, good morning, Kevin.
It was fantastic.
Hey, good morning. See, I thought you guys were talking about me because I just hopped on about the time you said that.
By the skin of our teeth and one step ahead of the sheriff, this is Maintenance Matters, which might, by the way, describe Maintenance Matters in many ways because so many people wait till the last minute to do anything in regards to maintenance. I'll get to that later. I better get to that now because I'm on the side of the road at this point. How was your weekend, by the way, my friend?
Oh, it was good. It was good. Got a little chilly on Sunday, but
A little bit?
What'd you put in your chili?
No, snow. No.
Let me tell you something, man. We could not have timed our winter preventative segments better than we did. We closed them out last week, and then literally I have Mike Roth racing down to Gulf Shores. Why? He doesn't want to be in Indiana, so he's like 54 degrees at the beach. Sounds like a day in the sun. It was compared to what's going on in a lot of the Midwest and the Mideast right now. It's crazy. I mean, it's as if right on cue. Oh yeah. Can you hear me? I'm breaking up a little bit there. Are you guys getting me? You getting me, Dre?
Yeah.
Because I'm.
Oh, okay. I get what you're going through. I got you. I'm coming over.
That's gotta stop. So what are we talking about today, Kevin? Let's just kind of jump in.
Oh, I thought we would try to spend some time here, maybe even the next couple of weeks or so, talking about some air brakes and the importance of air brake maintenance. But quite honestly, it starts further upstream than that. And a lot of people always seem to they don't. It's one of those things that kind of gets overlooked. And I know you guys on this show and people that may listen out there on a regular basis get so tired of hearing me say this, but that air filter on that engine is so critical for more than just one simple reason, because that's also the filter that filters the air into your air compressor. So it's one of those deals, I'm always preaching about these air filters, but I could never overemphasize the importance of keeping a good clean air filter on the truck.
And it's one of those things too where that really is a gradually and then all of a sudden. There are some things that just go from 0 to 60 and boom, you're done. And there's some things that really do take a long time and you can slowly watch the deterioration in what is happening. That filter is one of those things where it's kind of like, well, I'll get to that, and then literally what the hell happened? It really is a gradually and all of a sudden kind of situation sometimes, because take us through what not really doing that, what not really keeping up with that can do to you.
Well, it's kind of like you were suggesting, well, I'll get to that later. Well, oh, yeah, someone asked, when's the last time you changed your air filter? Oh, well, it was a couple months ago, but I'll get that later. I'll get that later, and then next thing you know, someone's asking you again. Well, it was a couple months ago. Well, it's a couple months after you said it was a couple months, and next thing you know, this thing it can gradually over time. The dirtier it gets, and a lot of this will have a lot to do with the environment that you're running in, and anytime you've run through areas where there's lots of dust, possible smoke, things like that, you're going to get more solid particles out of that air that's going to pick them up, and you may not actually be able to see that from the outside of that air filter or anything all the time. Having a gauge or something on it, that's a great thing. The only problem with that is a lot of those gauges, are fed by little small lines that connect to them, or small orifices. And a lot of times, if there's enough dirt or debris, even a leaf could clog up one of those orifices enough that those gauges don't read properly. So it can happen, right? Especially this time of year with leaves falling everywhere, no matter where you're at, even on the interstate, you see them flying around. So
I'm asking a question of ignorance, and I'm making sure I'm understanding this. So be like, well, my gauges, I probably should think about getting that changed. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, the gauges are fine. I'm fine. That's the problem, isn't it? It's like there comes a
lot
point.
of times, right? A lot of time. I mean, that's what we do in our vehicles, right? I probably need to look at this, but look, I probably need to put some air in this tire, but my light's not on. I'm okay.
And I'm laughing because I'll be driving like on the I-5, like in California. Oh, my light's on. Probably should get that tire fixed. Oh, the light went off. I'm good. It just fixed itself.
Yeah, it fixed itself.
Just put some air in there. Okay, I'm good. Yeah. Somehow, some way, the California Santa Ana winds refilled my tire with air. I'm good to go. A little further down the road. No, I mean, the thing is, that's what's so important about that sort of mindfulness. We've talked about gauges a lot on this show. But the idea is that once you see them, you should be like, you know what? Especially when you make a living off of it, let's go take a look at the soonest possible point in that. So, with the air filter, you get that slow air build, you get excessive wear in the compressor, but you can get oil in the air brake system too, which is just a disaster.
Yeah, because what happens is all three of those things you mentioned can be based off of simply a dirty air filter, because as that compressor runs, it's trying to pull air in from that intake, and as it does that, if it's restricted at all, now it has to pull it a little bit harder, which actually causes the rings in the compressor on the piston inside the compressor to actually unseat enough that oil can bypass. And once they do that, when it goes back up to compress the air and send it out, now you've got oil droplets in there, and the more that happens, the more it wears on that piston, on that compressor, and that's how it can wear that air compressor. It's just simple things like that you really don't think a whole lot about, but you got to figure, that air compressor, most of them on most trucks, over the road trucks, is just a single piston in there. But most all air compressors are gear driven nowadays, so anytime that engine's turning, that piston's going up and down. Just like with the engine, it's anytime the engine's running, that air compressor piston's going up and down. So now, it may not be compressing all the time. That's your unloader valve in there that does that. But it's doing that based off of air pressure in the system. So as it's doing this, though, as it goes up and down, when it is actually trying to pull air in and compress air, as it pulls down, it actually kind of creates a vacuum to pull that air in. And that's kind of the opposite way that, the rings and stuff in there are made. So you put too much of a restriction on there to try to pull that vacuum, and all of a sudden it's just harder to pull, when you think about it that way. And as it does that, it can cause those rings to bypass some oil or anything else that may come through,
Yeah, and that's what's so important here is the fact that, like I said, we're going back to the beginning, to the actual scene of the crime. Is the fact that it's like, I mean, there is a theory. Benjamin Bratton came up with it. It's why New York in the '80s made that dramatic turn from being an absolute war zone into becoming a whole lot better in Times Square, because it's a theory called broken windows, that the moment you start seeing broken windows in a neighborhood, you should start policing the neighborhood when people aren't fixing them. And the best way to kind of prevent having to do all the kind of work we're going to talk about here on your air compressor is simply change the darn filter. Just get it changed.
That's right.
You know,
that's right. That's right.
Because everything we're going to talk about next, in many ways, could have been prevented. Not all of it, but a great deal of it could have been prevented by simply changing that filter. We should probably pivot to the air compressor here at some moment. But is there anything else in regards to air filter impact that you'd like to cover?
Well, I mean, the compressor itself is the main item we're talking about it impacting anyway, which, so that could kind of lead us right into that air compressor and talk about that. So when you do, if you got that problem with that air filter and it's caused that restriction I'm talking about, it kind of, even though that thing's gear driven and, everything's mechanically connected, as any of these things rotate and move up and down, there's a natural harmonic that's created, with like a vibration,
right.
Just because you've got moving components and everything. Well, they're designed to work. Everything's designed to work at certain levels of this stuff. So these different harmonics going on in the engine and the truck itself and things like that. But when you kind of move that area of harmonics out, now all of a sudden those vibrations may be, a little more defined, a little harsher, in different places and components, which can actually cause, mounting hardware, nuts, bolts, different things like that, to actually maybe not have the intended clamping force against another component that they should, and not to mention, you've got temperature changes, as the engine warms up, and you've got dissimilar metals that may be bolted together, so you may have aluminum on one side and steel or cast iron or something on the other. So they're going to heat up and cool down at different rates, and the torque values for a lot of mounting bolts and things like that, especially for compressors, are critical, because that bolt is designed to hold it there throughout this certain range. So you start throwing it out of that range, and all of a sudden you could get these vibrations, which can actually cause bolts to back off at times, things like that.
I'm laughing. If we didn't call this segment "Maintenance Matters," I'd call it "Natural Harmonics" with Kevin Lindsey. No, because basically you're messing with the string section of an orchestra is what you're doing. I mean, right. you can begin to hear things go out of tune. There's a reason why you got to have a tune-up. I mean, I hate to be so ridiculous, but there's a reason why all this stuff. Sometimes there are musical analogies that work their way in when it doesn't sound right. I mean, the way an engine is supposed to, we've all heard it's got that nice hum, and that's the harmonics. I mean, and when that hum goes out of whack, it starts shaking and vibrating things, and when things start shaking and vibrating, they start loosening, they start breaking, they start cracking, all of that kind of stuff, so that you're constantly, one of the first best places you can do maintenance after making sure your air filter works is just by listening. You can hear it. You can hear that something is off, and that's such an important part. So that's where you check the mounting. If you begin to hear that thing, it's the first thing you want to do with an air compressor is check that mounting, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because when the air compressor does kick in and starts pumping, and it's compressing air, you get a little bit different sound to the engine anyway. You can kind of hear it kick in and out, and most drivers, know their trucks well enough that they can tell when it's doing that, when it cuts off, when it cuts on, when it's actually pumping, when it stops, not just from looking at air pressure gauges on the dash, but you can hear it, a lot of times. I've had drivers tell me, they hear it coming on and off going down the road, which, I'm not going to say I can, but, I've been listening to these things for so long. I've got a certain frequency range that my hearing is not necessarily as good as it used to be because of repeated sounds I've heard from trucks and things like that
Well,
over the
I mean,
years.
let me make sure I get this right. So it couldn't be because of the fact that you've been around humming and roaring engines since the time you were on a farm, through your period in the Air Force, and then through an entire career in 80,000-pound monsters rolling up and down the highway. It's got nothing to do with that.
No, I'm sure it doesn't. I'm sure it has nothing to do with that.
It's really funny, Kevin. You know, I've done a lot of HVAC work in my life, and there were people who we've actually fixed their HVAC, fix the systems that kind of cool their house, and they get upset at first because I don't know if you've ever had this experience of that kind of thunk that you will hear when an air conditioner kicks on. That's not a good thing. You should barely hear it. It should be like home, and then the air conditioner begins to kind of kick on. But there's so many people who live in these houses where these HVAC systems, literally God said, let there be light. He hit the light switch and then he turned on the AC. And these things, I mean, you can hear them, you know, and people get the comfort of the recognition of cool air or hot air is coming. But it's like you don't want to hear those kind of honk. I mean, those thunking sounds when things kick on. It's not a good scene, is it?
No. That sounds to me like you got an air filter loose and on the side. It's trying to pull itself in because it's probably dirty.
Yeah, but as I always say, it's like people have literally told me that means things are getting cool. No, that means the thing's working too hard.
Something's working too hard to make noise, right? It's
I have a strange question because you have, when I was going through your air compressor notes, it says check for leaks, oil, coolant, air. And I was kind of curious if there's a connection here, the idea that if the mount is off and the harmonics are off, it causes the kind of vibrations and the kind of shakes and the kind of knocks that actually cause leaks. That the bump causes wear and tear. That's kind of what's happening here a lot of the time, right?
Oh, absolutely. Because, like I was saying, these air compressors, most of them nowadays are gear driven, which means they're going to be mounted to that engine. And so there's going to be some sort of seal, whether it's an O-ring or a gasket. So if the mounting gets loose, now you've got movement between two different pieces, which is going to disrupt that seal in some form or fashion, no matter how slight. But it's going to eventually cause, oil from the engine to leak out because, again, these things are gear driven, so they have to be lubricated, right? So they're mounted to the engine, so there's a lot of oil lubrication there, and the air compressor itself, has passageways in it where it does mount on these gear driven ones that it uses engine oil. So every time you do an engine oil change, you've still got a little bit of oil in that air compressor until, it fires up and starts running again. So, because I've had people ask me about that. So, so every time I get an oil change, I start it up and run it and then the oil looks dirty again. It's because you have residual oil, setting somewhere that's, whether it's by design or not, but a lot of times it don't always run out just right when you drain.
Well, it's also
oil, so.
There's also a bad diligence too, and like I said, please, I am actually asking questions here where I've seen people like they are very diligent about changing stuff when it runs down or when it goes dirty and all that kind of stuff. It's like, and the reason you having to make the change so many times is because you haven't gone further back in the chain of diagnostic, in the sense that because you didn't check your air filter, you've now got a problem with your compressor. You've now got to figure out where that oil leak or that coolant leak is actually happening, where the air leak is happening, which means you got to go back and check your mounting. What you shouldn't be doing is refilling stuff just to kind of get yourself to the next checkpoint. Fix the problem, right? It's like go back further and fix the problem is what we're talking about here. And you can, and then like I said, what is it? So you've checked the mounting, you've checked your oil, coolant, air, and all that stuff. You found your leaks. So maybe it might be a good idea to see how it's all kind of, if it has come out of whack, because as Jerry Lee Lewis said, a whole lot of shaking's going on, right?
Oh, right. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Because, you do get some of that movement and everything once these things start, and you notice that oil leak. Well, sure, you want to maintain the oil in the engine and everything to get to where you're going and all that. But, you've got to get that repaired, right? I mean, you got to get that leak fixed, got to get it stopped, because once that starts, that oil leak could be an indication that something is loose. And if that's the case, you also have coolant lines going to that air compressor to cool down. So you got a different coolant circuit flowing through it, Uh, so now you could have those lines, if something's getting loose, can actually start moving and because they're going to expand and contract at different levels as well because they're different materials. So now you could end up with a coolant leak. You get a slight oil leak, and that leads to a coolant leak, and now your coolant's low, and you got to add a little coolant, got to add a little oil, all this stuff, and it could all go back to when's the last time I replaced that air filter?
We're going to keep on. We're going to keep on.
I'm going to keep going back there. I'm just going to keep going
and it's
back
because
there.
when you finally get this stuff fixed, it's like, at that point, somebody's going to say, we've done all this work, but it all really begins with the simplest and probably the cheapest approach of changing the damn air filter. The air leaks are the toughest, though, because at least with the oil and the coolant, you can see what's going on. It's like, and then, then you kind of look, you're not looking, you're feeling at that point,
Yeah, and really what happens is, once that starts and you do start getting those air leaks, well, you just lost pressure, which now means my pressure dropped, which means my unloader valve and my compressor is going to kick in. So now it's going to be pumping harder. More often than it normally would, but I've got this other problem up here that you really don't recognize yet. So now it's only compounding what was already going on, what started the whole process, right? So now you got more oil bypassing those rings in that compressor, get pumped out. But here's the thing that this can happen. Well, I've got this hot load though. I need to go get this done. You go get your work done. You get your load, get it dropped where you're going. You got to get these things looked at because if you don't, oh look, man, I've got a good customer call me and need me to go pick up this load. So you take off, back across the country to go get it. And so next thing you know, you've put it off a couple of weeks, a few thousand miles. Well, these things are still going on with that truck, right?
Yeah,
So,
and I want to keep on emphasizing this too. Kevin just said something. Put it off a couple of weeks. The difference between massive maintenance and actually just getting kind of checked on. The difference between actually having catastrophic work repair and getting stuff checked on and kind of reset is a matter of weeks. And that's the reality of it. I wanted to read you. Trucker Bosun says air dryer canister along with the filter should be checked regularly. Thank you for your input, Trucker Bosun. And by the way, Trucker Bosun, thank you for your service in the U.S. Navy. I wanted to kind of shout that out on this Veterans Day. Okay, sorry, I got totally in the weeds there.
Oh no.
But let's kind of talk about the compressor in general. This is such a tough segment to do because we have people who absolutely know the ins and outs of their truck, and we have onboarding people who are just kind of getting behind the wheel of a truck and kind of learning about this stuff. Can we talk about the compressor itself? What makes it work? How does the compressor work?
Well, really, as far as the air compressor goes, kind of like I was explaining, most of them are gear driven nowadays. So anytime the engine's running, you've got a crankshaft and the compressor turning around, the piston's going up and down. Well, the way an air compressor works is we got, I just call them, for lack of a better term, intake valves and exhaust valves in the actual head of the compressor. So you really stop and think about it, the compressor itself is nothing other than a small engine that don't create power, it consumes power. So it has to be driven by something else that has created power, like the engine itself. So when you really think about that, but all it's doing is pulling air in on the intake stroke as the piston moves down. The intake valve is open, the exhaust valve is going to be closed. So then as the piston starts coming up to compress, the intake valves are going to close, and the exhaust valves are going to stay closed for a while until it pressurizes that enough as that piston comes up. Then you have to slow this down in extremely slow motion to truly understand what's happening. So it's just compressing that air. As it gets to a certain point, then that exhaust valve it opens. It overcomes spring tension on that exhaust valve and allows that pressurized air puff, to go out. So it's going to go out that line. So when it's doing that pull down, and if it's pulled any oil past those rings, when it does that pressurized, now that compressed air, which you stop and think about it, anytime you do that, you may pull in, say it's, today is 40-degree air that it's pulling in, but it's next to the engine, this thing's hot, and as it compresses, it actually heats it up. Well, all air has some moisture in it. So as it heats that up, as it compresses to build it up to 120 psi, which internally in that compressor, as it builds it up, it's actually a little higher than that, right? So as it pushes up and overcomes the tension on that exhaust valve, pushes it out into the line. Now you relieve that pressure real quickly. So when you do that, you get this flow going around that exhaust valve as it moves out, which is some friction. So even more oil you got in it, the more heat that can generate. And now it's got to do all of that again, and it does this multiple times per second, So when you stop and think about it, really all it's doing is like a puff, 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 and you just stack all those on top of each other. And you've got these small heating up, cooling down as it does that. And the more oil that's bypassed those rings as it hits that line, and we call that a discharge line that goes out to that air dryer that does need to be checked on a regular basis and all that good stuff. So, but as it does that, this discharge line heats up. It's going to be really hot at the compressor, but it's going to cool down by the time it gets to that air dryer. So any solid particles such as oil or dirt, debris are going to rest on the lining of that discharge line. Over time, that can kind of build up, very, very similar to a clogged artery. And we all know what happens when your arteries clog up.
It's happening to me right now. It's happening to me right now, as a matter of fact. I want to take a few moments here to kind of say thank you for your service, but rather than putting you on the spot and making it awkward, I wanted to ask if there was one thing, given your experience and given all that you know about the way engines work and the way transportation and the way transport works, if there was anything from your service in particular that you learned about the trucking industry or about how engines work that has really stuck with you. You go back and say, "Oh, thank God I was in the Air Force because I learned this."
Well, I was when I went in the Air Force, I was typically through basic training and my tech school, which was as a diesel mechanic. I was actually slightly older than most of my fellow airmen at the time. Because I waited a couple of years after I graduated high school to go in. I tried the college route for a bit and all that. But I would say this: I had been around, done some things, done a lot of mechanical work, been taught a lot of bad habits that I didn't know were bad at the time.
Right.
When I learned how things really work, I can remember sitting in class in tech school at Chanute Air Force Base in Rantoul, Illinois, and these light bulbs just kept going off in my head as instructors explained to me how things actually work. And and I remember thinking, everybody that's doing this should understand this. This is so easy. But a lot of it was because I had already had some experience with my hands on and had seen a lot of the conditions, that he was describing. This can do this, and I'm like, oh wow. So I started putting these different things together in my head, and to give you just a very, very slight example, and I know it's going to sound funny talking about military vehicles, but we actually had an air conditioning section in there, and I learned that everything I thought I knew about vehicle air conditioning, which all air conditioning is the same, I was totally wrong.
Well,
I did not understand the concepts of what really was happening. So
it's kind of like
but
when a natural athlete plays his first organized sports ever. It's when you have an instinctive feel for how it works, but you've developed your own language, and then somebody comes
yeah,
along and says, "Let me give you all the shortcuts you've never had your entire life to show you how this stuff really works." That is the big thing that training and
yeah,
actual
right.
study makes a difference with. Kevin, we are absolutely out of time.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I know. I'm telling you, dude, we're getting better at this every week. When we come back next time, we'll talk about air dryers, okay? We'll really dig into that stuff, okay? If you don't, unless you got something else on your mind.
Ah, sounds good.
Thank you, brother. Have the best of days.
Cheers.